Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Death Row Executions. Today's story is on Earl Wesley Berry, who was born on May 5th, 1959. What seemed to be a calm Sunday night on November 29th, 1987 in Mississippi suddenly turned into panic and worry for Charles Bounds when his wife Mary Bounds had not made any contact with him. He reported her missing at around midnight, and authorities found her car near a Baptist church. Charles's thoughts would not be able to settle because there was blood in Mary's car. The next day, on Monday, a passerby by the name of Cecile Woodard Jr. found a pair of women's shoes by the side of the road. He knew that there was a woman who had just recently been reported missing in the area. So he contacted authorities and led them to where he found the shoes. A search team scanned the area, and they first discovered Mary's earrings and eventually found her body close by on Chickasaw County Road near Houston, Mississippi. Detectives initially had no leads, but that changed when a man named James Berry reached out to investigators, letting them know that his brother was acting strange and thought he could be connected to the recent murder of Mary Bounds. Investigators arrested James's brother, and he was none other than Earl Wesley Berry. Earl grew up in Mississippi with a sister and 5 other brothers. He had a history of mental health issues and had been institutionalized for his paranoid schizophrenia. When authorities brought him in for questioning, they noticed his knuckles were skinned. Earl claimed that he was told the death penalty would be off the table if he let them know everything that happened to Mary Bounds. The accounts of what happened come solely from Earl due to the fact that there was no concrete evidence to tie him to the murder. Earl, however, had recently been released from prison and was out on parole, so the death penalty was actually off the table, and his words are the only accounts of what happened the night Mary Bounds was killed. Earl's story began. He was spending time at a friend's house, and after leaving, he drove to Houston, Mississippi at around 7:00 p.m. on Sunday, November 29th, 1987. He saw Mary Bounds near the Baptist church and approached her. As Berry reached for her, she screamed, so he hit her and forced her into his car and drove out of town. He took Mary to the woods, picked her up, and put her over a fence and instructed her to lie down. Earl intended to assault her, but for some reason he changed his mind in that moment. He lifted her over the fence again and told her to get into the car so he could return her to town. Instead of heading towards where Mary was picked up, Earl drove in the opposite direction and took her to a different wooded area. Mary was begging for her life, but Earl still killed her with his bare hands. While Mary was lying on the ground, a car drove by and Earl jumped on top of her in order to hide her body from whoever was in the passing vehicle. When the car left, Earl picked Mary's body up and carried her deeper into the woods and left her there. Earl then left the woods and drove south to his grandmother's house, where he ended up getting rid of the shoes he wore during the murder. He also burned the clothes he was wearing and did his best to clean any traces of blood from the inside of his car. The towel he used to clean the car was then thrown into a pond near his grandmother's house. The car Earl was using belonged to his grandmother, but she was oblivious to what Earl was doing with it or what was inside. Earl, on the other hand, was unaware of the fact that his brother James was at the house and saw some of the strange things he was doing, and they were strange and abnormal enough for him to call the police on his brother. Despite Earl claiming that he was told the death penalty would be taken off the table, prosecutors used his confession against him in trial, and on November 29th, 1987, Earl was sentenced to death by a Chickasaw County jury. Over the years, Earl tried to appeal his case numerous times. Earl was scheduled to be executed by method of lethal injection on October 30th, 2007 at the Mississippi State Pen in Parchman. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit denied a final stay of execution, but the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to grant Earl a stay of execution just minutes before he was scheduled to die. The stay was granted because of the constitutionality of lethal injection, but his case was not commuted. His sentence was not changed, just delayed. The U.S. Supreme Court eventually denied Earl's appeals, and he was given a new execution date for May 21, 2008. The Mississippi Department of Corrections Commissioner Chris Epps said that he stood in front of Earl's cell and he asked him, "Mr. Berry, do you have any remorse for what you did to Mrs. Bounds?" Earl responded by saying he had no remorse and felt that after 21 years he had paid for it. Chris Epps said that Earl understood the question, and that was the answer he gave. Earl had a final meal of barbecue pork sausages, buttered toast, barbecue pork chops, salad with heavy onions on top, mashed potatoes and gravy, pecan pie, and juice. He finished his meal at around 4:35 p.m. and was given a sedative. The prison offered for him to take a last shower, but he refused to take a shower and did not make any phone calls. Earl did, however, get visits that day from his mother, brother, sister-in-law, and 2 friends. He was executed at 6:15 p.m. on May 21, 2008, and gave no final words.